All right, something you should know about me. There's only so many fears they really have in this world, but this would be definitely amongst the top. And it is a complete and utter fear of crowds. I hate being in crowded places. So like if friends wanted to go to dinner on a Friday night, and they were trying to choose where to go, at the top of my list would be which place is not going to be crowded tonight, right? Forgetting the taste of the food or how expensive it is, where is it not going to be crazy crowded? Or if I have to go somewhere where I'm not quite sure if there's going to be parking for me and there's a possibility of having to parallel park, that's horrifying. I don't want to do it. So a year and a half ago, my wife and I had Disneyland passes, and it just so happened at the same time, Disneyland was celebrating their 60th anniversary. So they decided to keep the park open for 24 hours one day. And Kristen and I thought, this will be kind of fun. Let's give it a shot. We're going to show up about 5 o'clock and just see how long we could last and then call it a night. Well, we get there at 5 o'clock, and we could not have been prepared for what we were going to encounter. The lines were so long that it took us 2 hours just to get through baggage check. That was it, let alone get in the park. So what had happened was, over the course of time there, when the baggage claim area, or baggage check area, which is separated from the entrance of the park, that's also where the trolleys and the buses come in, this huge line had formed going all the way back to where the buses were dropping off. And so when Kristen and I and some others got there, we found ourselves in the actual bus lane where the bus was heading. And so we had to kind of stay to the side, trying not to get run over by a bus. Admittedly, it was kind of a dangerous situation. A security guard caught on to this, actually, and so the Disneyland security guard started going to everyone who was in this section of the line, saying, you can't be here, you have to move, you've got to get out of the way of the buses. And no one did anything. And he kept doing that, going back and forth, you guys have to move, you can't be here, you have to get out of the way of the buses. And nothing happened. Now, it is true that we were probably all just a little bit on edge from the unexpected crowds. But it really wasn't malice. See, for all of the security guard's efforts to move people, he didn't give us an alternative place to go. There was no other plan. And so after the third or fourth time he comes by, those of us who were there together, we just turn to each other and say, we have to stand somewhere. And this morning, that's what we're going to talk about. We have to stand somewhere. We're in a series that we've called Revolutionary, looking at the teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. And those teachings, by the way, start in Matthew chapter 5. You're welcome to turn there. This morning, we're wrapping up the series. So we're going to look at some things that are in Matthew 5, 6, and chapter 7. Most of our time will be spent at the end of chapter 7. But in looking at this series, we've learned a lot of things. Jesus has told us a lot. We've learned kind of a different way of interacting with the world around us. We identified early on, Kent helped us understand this, that when Jesus was talking to people about what was happening in their world, that they oftentimes had these Old Testament laws in their minds that were sort of a minimum requirement, things that they just had to do. They had to at least obey those laws. And Kent helped us understand that when Jesus gave alternatives, he was helping people to exchange the minimum requirement for maximum love. And it was that kind of maximum love that would make his followers different. When they would interact with the world, they would just behave in a way that no one else could fully explain, because they were operating under a different paradigm, under a different kind of teaching. That was the teaching that Jesus shows us in the Sermon on the Mount. And so now we come to the end. Jesus has given us all of these words, all of these things that we need to know, need to understand, and take to heart. And so what I find so fascinating is that for all of this positive reworking of what it means to be part of this human race, he ends with this phrase: it fell with a great crash. This is the last phrase in the Sermon on the Mount. It fell with a great crash. Which, unless you're a demolitionist or Wreck-It Ralph, that's typically not what you want, right? You don't want things to fall with a great crash. That's destruction, that's negative, that's not seemingly what we're going for. We see this, all the time in our world. This is a picture of the Canto Bridge in Vietnam. It was completed in 2010. It's a cable suspension bridge. It's really an important passageway for them. But it got delayed. It was actually supposed to be completed in 2008, but that couldn't happen because in 2007, this happened. A 300-foot slab fell over 100 feet while 250 engineers were working on it. When this happened, over 50 of them died. About 100 of them were seriously injured, a lot more just injured. It was a major catastrophe. So bad, of course, that the Vietnamese government launched an investigation into what happened, and they put the contractors who were responsible for this on suspension. Because when there's a crash and there's destruction, it's not a good thing. It could be horrible. It could have devastating effects. We want to avoid these kinds of crashes. throughout the world and in our lives. And this is the kind of picture that Jesus wants us to walk away with. He doesn't want us to run past this, because this image is what he's going to end with, this crash. Let's see how he gets there. Go back to verse 24 in chapter 7. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundations on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. This is what we're looking at. Now, this is not the first time in chapter 7 that Jesus is going to present us with two options. If you were here last week when Dave was talking to us, a lot of what happens at the end of chapter 7 is a series of twos. Last week, we talked about two different kinds of gates, a narrow gate that led to life and a wide gate that led to destruction. We talked about two kinds of fruits that people might bear, one bad, one good. There were even two kinds of disciples who heard what Jesus said and put them into practice, and disciples who heard what Jesus said but did not act upon them. And now we have one more set of two, one more contrast. We're looking at two kinds of builders. One builder who builds his house on the rock. This builder is the one who listened to Jesus' teachings and actually acted on them. The one who went back to the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount and said, this is the way I want to live my life. This is the kind of builder who decided it's not enough just to avoid harming my neighbor, but when I feel anger, I need to quell that. I need to turn that into a restored relationship with my neighbor. I need to not just avoid adultery, but I need to make sure that I don't treat anyone of the opposite gender in such a way that it reduces them to an object. I need to not just maintain the truth of the things that I swear to, but everything I say in life should be based in truth. I need to not just love the people who look like me and think like me, I need to love even my enemies. I'm going to not simply give to the needy and pray and fast so that other people can look at my life and say how awesome I am. I'm going to do these things because I want a relationship with God. I'm going to be the kind of person who doesn't worry because I know that worry doesn't give me anything and that I'm in the hands of the God of the universe. And this is the kind of builder who is going to suspend judgment so that he can look into his own life and decide, how can I better reflect the kingdom of God before I say anything to anyone else? This is the wise builder, building his house on a solid foundation. Now, contrasted with that is another builder who built his house on the sand, which obviously sounds like a horrible idea, because usually in our heads we think of sand like we see at Huntington Beach. How could anything possibly stand on that? But this was an image actually that they would have understood. They would have seen this a lot. If you tried to build your house on any one of the bodies of water near them in Judea, you would have known about this phenomenon. It's this, that the soil during the hot and dry season would kind of all clump together and would seem very hard. It's kind of an alluvium soil is what they call it. And so this, during the summer, seems like something you could step on, you could even build on, it will be just fine. The problem is it's really a collection of sediment, so the moment there's moisture, it starts to break apart. When you have rising streams, or when you have storms, and you introduce water into the environment, this seemingly hard surface crumbles, and anything you've built on it will get washed away. Now, the smart builders knew that this was an occurrence, and so sometimes they would dig up to 10 feet down to find bedrock so that they could build a house on something that was stable and wouldn't wash away. This was a well-known metaphor. It was easy, it was simple. Now, for us today, fortunately, we live in a time and place where no one would make the mistake of building a structure on an unsolid foundation, right? Well, when they first did their inquiry, the thought was the contractors must have cut some corners, that the big load-bearing support beam that was ultimately to blame for this whole thing, that somehow they must have cut corners. But on further investigation, that wasn't it at all. They built this giant support beam on alluvium soil. And it didn't even take water for this thing to go wrong. Eventually, the sediment just shifted just a little bit, no more than 2 degrees. And that's all it took for this support beam to lose its ability to hold the bridge together. And that 300-foot slab just came crashing to the ground because the foundation was not firm. So today, we find ourselves in a situation much like those who are with Jesus. We have a choice to make. And the people who are with Jesus that day, they had a choice to make. And there were actually a lot of them. Back in Matthew chapter 5, the very first verse of this whole thing says this: "Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them." So if you could get this in your head, Jesus, he had already seen these crowds were following him. We saw that in chapter 4. The crowds were going wherever he was going. And so as he saw them, he got himself into a position where he could talk to his disciples specifically, be it 12 or maybe more. There were a couple of other people who also wanted to follow Jesus. We don't know. Whoever it was that considered themselves a disciple, Jesus was talking to them specifically, but there was this big crowd around as well. And they got to listen in on the things that Jesus was teaching his disciples during this whole sermon. And the crowd got to hear the same kinds of things. They got to have their paradigms challenged just like the disciples did. And in the end, they knew that they had been part of something different. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. Okay, so the crowds, even the disciples, they would have been used to someone talking about Old Testament laws. This was a very common practice. The thing is, all of the other teachers kind of did the same thing. They would take an Old Testament law, something that seemed important to them, like don't murder, that's a great one, but then they would add on top of that other laws to follow. And the idea was if you follow this law on top of a law, you could be sure you're following the base law. And so eventually another teacher would come in and they would see the law on top of the law and they would say that's not enough either. And they would add a third law. And so there would be this tier system of laws and traditions, rules to follow that became so cumbersome that you started to lose the very sense of why the scriptures were written in the first place. You lost the heart behind it because there were so many rules to follow. That's what the crowds were used to. They were used to teachers doing this. But now they have Jesus. And Jesus is taking some of the same Old Testament laws and doing something completely different. See, rather than adding more rules to follow, Jesus deconstructed the rule in the first place. He said it's not about avoiding murder. It's about ridding your heart of anger. It's not about avoiding adultery. It's about ridding your heart of lust. And all throughout the Sermon on the Mount, we begin to see that these rules are really about our hearts. And we are the ones who need to be different. And so the crowd found themselves in a weird place where two things were happening at once. It was true that at the same time, these teachings were now more difficult to follow than they had ever possibly imagined because it required them to change. But they were also more accessible than they had ever been before. This wasn't a teacher adding his insight onto existing teaching. This was someone with authority bringing about a revolutionary new way of living in the kingdom of God. And the crowd saw it, and they were amazed. But here's the thing, though. Being amazed does not necessarily translate into being committed. Those are two different things. All we know from the crowd is that they were amazed. It might be that some of them that day decided to follow Jesus. I suspect that many of them left amazed, but with no further change in their life. Jesus' aim was never to leave us in amazement. Jesus was asking us to move our entire life onto a firm foundation and build it from there. And that choice between simply being amazed or following Jesus should give us some sense of discomfort because it's not an easy one. It requires us to completely reorient how we think about our life. But it's a choice that we have to reckon with because we have to stand somewhere. This right here is a picture of our dog, Rory, which means I'm 2 girls shy of being in Jen Cutshall's Sunday school class, so, we're almost there. We're getting close. Rory's great. We love Rory. We're not completely sure what she is. We know there's some Chihuahua in her and then some other breeds that make her a little bit bigger and a little bit less yippy, but we love her. She's great. The thing about Rory is that she cannot control her personality or who she is. She is going to be a product of genetics and her environment every time. We adopted her about 5 years of age, which meant that she had 5 years with another family, a family that fortunately helped to potty train her. That was great. But also, over time, she would have picked up some of their personalities and the way things were done in their house, things that we don't know right now. We also know that since she's been with us, she's picked up some of our personality traits, including our love for fuzzy things. She'll always steal our fuzziest blanket before we can get to it. But this dog cannot help but being who she is. There are just certain things that are really important to her. It's important to her to go on walks, to sleep, to eat. When I get home, I usually feed Rory, and then if my wife comes in afterwards, she'll go up to the empty dog bowl and be like, "Daddy didn't feed me, give me more." It's a total lie. I totally fed her. This dog has certain things on her mind, and that's it. She's not really able to decide what kind of dog she wants to be. That's not within her power. See, the decision to choose our foundation is something that is uniquely human, something that can only be true for those who have the very breath and image of God in them. We get to choose our foundation. Now, it's true that we're still going to some extent be products of the culture that we live in, some things that we can't control, but humans have the ability to think through that and decide, I actually want to be a certain type of person. I actually want to build my life a certain way. And so there's a decision to make. What am I going to base my foundation on? What's my foundation going to be? And decide we must. See, there are people who don't decide in life what their foundation is going to be, and if you find yourself in that situation, what tends to happen is we just kind of grab whatever is most accessible to us in the moment until something else sounds better, and then we kind of grab at that. And so our foundation really is whatever feels best to me at the time. Other people are very conscious of what they choose to build their life on. For some people, it's other religions or a different way of thinking. For some people, it's security. I want to make sure that I am financially sound so that nothing bad can happen to me so far as I can control it. I mean, they're good things in many cases. For some people, their foundation is their family, giving up everything for their family. For some people, it's a hobby or a sport or an activity that they love. For others, it's just the ability to do whatever I want whenever I want to do it, and they organize their life around that guiding principle. For some people, it's a nation. And all of these things make for inferior foundations. The nation one's particularly interesting today. We had a kind of a fun week. If you were like me on Tuesday, things were really interesting. See, I was sick on Tuesday, but my plan was to turn on CNN, see the little map of the United States, see that the pollsters had gotten it generally correct, and then go to bed. That was my plan. But when I turned on the television, Ohio was already red, bright red, like that was decided. I was surprised by that. So now I've got to leave this thing on. Florida is flickering between red and blue, and suddenly it also lands red. And I realize we've got ourselves a race. This thing is not decided, and it wasn't until much later in the night, and I stayed up all the way until Donald Trump gave his acceptance speech, because this was just completely different than what the pollsters thought was going to happen. And so we awoke on Wednesday morning to a world that was just different than what we thought was going to happen. For some of us, that was a great thing. For others, not so much. And that's just the problem with an election like this. For a congregation this size, we're going to have voted many different ways. We're going to have a lot of different opinions about the outcome here. For some people in this room, when Hillary lost, it instilled in them a sense of fear. A fear not even necessarily for themselves, maybe, but maybe a fear for their neighbors who are a different gender or race or religion. For others, when it turned out that Donald Trump won, it instilled hope. Hope that an entrenched establishment might finally see some real and meaningful change that could change the way that this nation works for the better. And for a lot of people who never really wanted to pick Hillary or Donald in the first place, we just felt lost, but that was true on Monday too. And here we are, a people who probably, politically, are divided. That's a reality that is set in now. And these feelings that we have are legitimate. The fear that many people have can't be assuaged simply by a platitude like God is in control, because that fear is very real and impacts how we live our life. For others, that hope is extremely brightening. We did not think that we were going to have this kind of hope today. And those two things happen at the same time. And it could cause some division. It's okay to feel these things. They're part of being human. They're part of what it means to do life together. They're part of being a shared society. The feelings themselves are valid and important. The problem is when either feeling, fear, hope, even feeling lost, I guess, become so powerful that they start to take over. And that is when we have a problem of extreme nationalism. See, nationalism is good to some extent. There's good forms of nationalism. We do live in a pretty amazing country that even gave us the opportunity to vote on Tuesday. We have a lot of freedoms that places in the rest of the world do not. And so some nationalism is totally called for. But when we start to put all of our hopes or all of our fears in a government, we are making our foundation something that is different than Jesus. And so if we find ourselves in a position where the outcome of an election, or really any political process, is making it so that I have a broken relationship with my neighbor, or even possibly another brother or sister in Christ, where the Christ of love should instead be uniting us, then I have a guess of what your foundation might be, and it doesn't sound like Jesus to me. Because as people of God, we have more in common than people who are on a shared political party. We have more in common in the love of Christ than anything else. And so nationalism can be a good thing. But in an extreme form, nationalism becomes our foundation. And let me tell you this, nationalism, like everything else we just talked about, is a pretty sandy foundation. It's going to let us down. Jesus is calling us to look at all aspects of our lives, things that are very current, things that might be long-standing. And all of these things, he's asking us to put in one hand and say, these are the things of the world, the things that people might base their life on. And over here is me. I am the foundation. I am the solid rock. And over here you can't go wrong. No change in the winds or the storm patterns or the streams is going to rock this foundation. But over here, we never know what's going to happen. And the winds and the streams, they come, and everything seems to collapse at times. And so we have a choice to make. A choice that sometimes is very painful. A choice that can actually be rather difficult. And Jesus does address this. In Luke chapter 14, he actually gives us another analogy of a builder. And this analogy, he helps us understand a little bit more of what it means to pay the cost. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, "This person began to build and wasn't able to finish." There's a cost to choosing Jesus as your foundation. If you're sitting here as someone who isn't a Christian, who's exploring the possibility, you're probably very aware of the costs that you would have to pay if you choose to follow Christ with your whole life. If you've been a Christian for a long time, there have probably been seasons in your life where the costs became more accentuated. I know for me, one of those seasons was when I just first started college. I grew up here. I love this church. I love the people who are here. But I started to realize that at times I didn't agree with everyone around me. And as you enter into college, you see this whole world that's in front of you that you didn't really observe before. You see all these other options of things that you could choose to do if only at times you set aside Jesus as your foundation, just for a moment. And they were there, and they were interesting. And there were times where it seems like, maybe I could just put this Christian thing to side just for a moment and see what else is there in the world. Yeah, I know that, my story is not wholly unique in that. I know a lot of people in college or young adulthood who've had that same dilemma. For some people, it's way later in life, but there's some crisis where suddenly the cost of being a Christian just feels really high. And it doesn't seem easy. And there is a cost to be paid. To say yes to Jesus in those years meant I had to say no to all of the other things that were happening around me, things that a lot of my friends chose to do or participate. And it was a high cost to pay. But I'll tell you this, in thinking through all of that, thinking through who I wanted to be, I realized that I had to stand somewhere. And where I was standing in that moment as a follower of Christ, well, that was bedrock. That was solid. And I wasn't going to give that up for anything that was going to be washed away later. Because as much as there is a cost to making Christ the foundation of your life, there is an incredible cost for any other decision, for choosing to go any other direction with the things in this world that will leave your life crashing down in some ways, at least at the end. See, these are things that maybe, like the alluvium soil, at times they seem like they'll support you. They seem like it's going to work. And for some people, it seems like it's working, but you end up finding yourself part of a very different story. And this is why it's so dangerous to remove yourself from the foundation of Jesus, even for a little while. I mean, even if it's only your 20s that you choose to walk away and go somewhere else, well, that's a good 10 years of your life where you are in your own story and completely not in God's. And everything that you could be doing for 10 years to help people understand the love of Christ and to move toward the kingdom, you've walked away from it. And that's time we just don't get back. And so choosing time and time again, day after day, year after year, to put our foundation, mark our foundation as Jesus, is something that's costly, but something we do time and time again. And it's worth it. Because now it's not just our little story. We're connected with what God is doing in the entire world. We're connected with the ways that He's making a difference. And we're part of something that is so much bigger than we could ever have possibly expected. And we stand not just amazed, but we stand committed to the God who loves so much that He gave up everything that was precious to Him to be with us. And that is what we mark as our foundation. Now, last week, Dave gave us an opportunity to make some steps toward God. So we had these crosses up here. We had an opportunity last week to make some of those steps to come forward. And if you want to do that at the end of the service, I encourage you to do that. Come talk to a pastor. But we're not going to do that in the service today. What I want us to think about is this. I want us to be aware of the cost of following Jesus. I want us to be aware because saying yes to Jesus will inherently mean that you say no to other things. And I don't want to be ignorant of that fact. But I do want to affirm that following Jesus is the only life that is worthwhile. It's the only thing worth marking as our foundation. Now, as a church, it's our responsibility to find ways to help each other do that. One of the ways that we just talked about was rooted. The idea of being rooted is a very similar metaphor to a foundation. It's something that goes deep, something that's not going to fall apart when the winds hit. And so if you haven't done rooted, I would encourage you to do that. I think that's a great step. But wherever you are today, I hope that we take one more step toward choosing Jesus as our foundation. If you need to talk to another Christian, to a pastor, to someone who works here, to someone that you trust, say, how can I do that? How can I take one more step toward building my life on Christ and making sure that everything I do is built on what He taught in Matthew chapter 5, 6, 7, built on everything that we see in the gospel message, is built on helping people to radically understand the kingdom of God in their lives. And that question will inform how we do everything. That question will inform who we are, what kinds of things we talk about, what kinds of things that we do. And everything else that's in this world, while important, will not nearly stack up to what God is doing and the gift that we have in being part of that. God, today, I pray that we would be focused on You, that we would be focused on what You are doing in the world, the work that You are doing to redeem a broken world to Yourself. And God, for many of us, we feel broken today. We feel like at times we've stepped off the solid foundation. And God, we want to get back on. So God, for those of us who are in that situation today, I pray that You'd meet us there. Because You are the God who heals broken things, who takes what's fallen apart and mends it back together. A God who does not let a crash be the last word, but at the end of the day, even after all is said and done, is bringing people back to Yourself. Because God, You love us, even in our brokenness. So God, once again, knowing full well the costs, we come before You and say, God, be our foundation. May our lives be built upon Your kingdom. In Your name we pray. Amen.